A car slams into a synagogue in suburban Detroit. The driver shot. Separately, a fatal shooting at Old Dominion University. Two events that evoke terror. We will tell you what we know. The Senate passes overwhelmingly the first significant federal legislation in decades to expand housing availability and lower costs. One of its authors, Massachusetts Democrat Elizabeth Warren, joins us. The first message from the new supreme leader of Iran. Its delivery may be telling us something. GOP Congressman Rick Crawford, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, tells us what he thinks. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to the Takeout. They might have nothing to do with one another. The car ramming at Temple Israel in West Bloomfield, Michigan, just outside of Detroit, and a fatal shooting in an ROTC class at Old Dominion University in Virginia. Or, motivationally, they could be connected in ways to evoke fear and met out some sort of vengeance. We do not know yet. As we await confirmation of whatever this was or wasn't, we know this: the events are harrowing, deeply unsettling. Now, I need to let you know this. There's a small possibility of an update from authorities about the synagogue attack during the show. If it occurs, we'll take you there. There is a 5:30 briefing by police about the Old Dominion University shooting. If that happens, we will take you there. So this is very much a fluid situation. I'm joined here at the family table by our Justice Department correspondent, Scott McFarland, National Security contributor Samantha Vinograd. All right, Scott, let's take these in sequence. What do we know, starting with, because it happened first, Old Dominion University, and then go to the situation West Bloomfield, Michigan?
Latest report, 1 dead, 2 wounded, and the person who is suspected of this is somebody who was just recently let out of federal prison, a man named Mohammed J-Lo, who, according to the responders on scene and the investigators, is responsible for the Old Dominion shooting. But he was also convicted in 2016 as an alleged ISIL member suspected of plotting a terror.
Inspired by ISIS.
Inspired by ISIL.
Convicted by that.
And he served roughly, doing the math here on the back of a cocktail napkin, 8 to 8.5 years. There's no parole in the federal system, but maybe he got his release stepped up for good behavior behind bars. He's the man suspected of being in Old Dominion's vicinity on the campus in Norfolk today. And
The Temple Israel Synagogue, West Bloomfield, Michigan.
Oakland County, Michigan, about 45 minutes north and west of Detroit. The sheriff there is Michael Bouchard, who says nobody was injured inside the facility, inside the synagogue. People were evacuated and sheltered in place outside. But the person responsible hasn't been named. We hope to get that in the next briefing. But according to the authorities, that person tried to ram the synagogue, in fact, did ram the synagogue, triggering some form of smoke or fire. It was security or some form of security that returned fire at the person in the vehicle, killing the person responsible.
Sam, my audience will want us to turn to you for some kind of contextualization of that. That is an incredible burden. I don't mean to play it on your shoulders, but how should we think about this?
It's a tough day for our country, Major. And I think these two developments really underscore the diverse nature of threats facing the country and a range of targets, a university and a Jewish institution. I should note, for the synagogue that was targeted, there is early child care, there is preschool, and there's a kindergarten on the premises. So there were very young children present in that synagogue today. What we now know is, as Scott articulated, an individual who was convicted and served time for providing material support to ISIL conducted allegedly this attack at university. That's one threat stream. ISIS and ISIL inspired and directed attacks in the homeland. And then separately, we don't know the motives about what happened at Temple Israel. That will be investigated. Certainly, there's a lot of talk about individuals inspired or directed by Iran, inspired, directed by ISIS. But the question is, how do we protect our students and our communities? And in both the case of universities and in the case of Jewish institutions and other religious sites, that's a public-private partnership. The U.S. government works closely with partners at the federal, state, and local level. But, for example, at my synagogue, at other synagogues, there's private security that's needed. It's already, and at a certain point, how many more patrol and security officers can you put at a site? There are resource limitations, and that's where we come back to trying to prevent and detect these things before individuals mobilize to violence. That's really hard when you're dealing with what we call lone actors, individuals who act alone or maybe with one other person. And so investigators certainly try to learn lessons from each attack so that it's not just about security on site, very important, but stopping an individual when they're on that radicalization timeline.
Sam, quick reminder to our audience, ISIL, ISIS.
They're the same. They have slightly different territorial aims, but overall are seeking to establish a caliphate, which is a religiously governed or run territory in specific parts of the Middle East and North Africa.
And Sam, we can't, it seems, logically disconnect these two events today from what's happening in Iran. They may not be directly related, but they are certainly within the atmosphere of time.
They are. Although we have an individual who's allegedly inspired by ISIS who conducted an attack in Boston.
And that's not the same thing as Iran. We should make it
It is. I mean, it is not the same thing. You know, saying someone was inspired by events in a country or by a geopolitical dynamic in today's content environment is very broad. An individual could be watching the news and feel inspired to act, or they could be in chat rooms where there's propaganda being circulated. That is different than a terrorist organization or a nation state saying, go conduct an attack on our behalf.
Scott, I know you well enough to know your body language. You want to jump in? Please jump in.
Tucson, Cleveland, Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, Washington, Detroit, all cities have ratcheted up their protection of Jewish religious facilities in the last few weeks or months amid this military action. Oakland County, Michigan had more protection in place, too, before today, and they've enhanced it around facilities moving after today.
And it's probably certainly the case that this attack could have been a whole lot worse if there wasn't security on site, if they weren't trained, if they didn't have the posture in place to prevent this from being worse. But the question is, how do we prevent these kinds of things from happening well before a vehicle is on the premises of a religious institution?
And Sam, you've been party to these conversations at pretty high levels of the United States government. What's being talked about tonight?
What's being talked about tonight is how to enhance information sharing with partners at all levels of government, how to enhance security posture at all levels of government, and whether we just have the right resources to collect information intelligence on individuals who are starting to mobilize to violence.
And Scott, do you think any of this will redound to Capitol Hill in terms of more security there or around there? Because that environment itself has been subject to a lot of threats in the last year or two.
We're going to find out soon. Tuesday, the U.S. Capitol Police Chief goes to Congress to ask for his budget for next year. I suspect it's going to be near $1 billion, if not more than $1 billion, and this is only going to raise the stakes.
Scott McFarland, Sam Vinograd,
Thanks.
Thank you. Michigan Democratic Senator Gary Peters joins us now. Senator, I know it's a fluid situation. Tell us what you know.
We're still trying to get more information about who the shooter is. Clearly, we just had a horrific incident in Michigan. Someone drove a vehicle into the synagogue and was shot when he went in. He may have had some accelerants. It may have been a fire. But if it wasn't for the quick action of security personnel that were there, likely lives would have been lost.
How do you characterize this situation, Senator?
Well, it's hard. Certainly it's an act of violence against a place of worship, which is absolutely reprehensible, and outraged by that. We don't know any more about any possible motives. The individual, when they were shot, was in the vehicle that caught fire. They're still looking for evidence to be able to track down who he was in order to determine what that motive may have been. But clearly it shows that we live in a world now where we have to make sure that our places of worship are secure. They're not the place like they used to be in the past where people would seek refuge without having security measures built into those places. And it's certainly horrible.
And to the best of our knowledge, everyone inside the synagogue and school safe?
My understanding, there is one of the security officers was injured. We're waiting to getting an update on his condition. We think he'll be fine, but we're so thankful that no children or any other people that were there were injured.
Senator, according to our excellent producers at CBS, this is the third attack on a house of worship in Michigan in less than 12 months.
It has been. And every one of these just breaks our heart, and we want to know that we're doing everything we can to try to prevent these in the future.
And does that, for the nation, for the state of Michigan, create an imperative for a kind of training and preparation that we just never thought would be necessary at places of worship?
Yeah, it's a problem. We've seen these attacks not just in Michigan, but around the country. That's why I've worked to have nonprofit security grants, which are grants that places of worship can apply for. Certainly many of those places are in Michigan, but around the country, whether it's a church, a synagogue, or a mosque. And because we see these incidents all over the country and are outraged, we now know we need to put that money in.
Senator, I don't want to jump to conclusions. I know you don't either, but people listening to our conversation might reasonably wonder, do you think there's any connection between this event and the ongoing war with Iran?
It's hard to know. It really is hard to know. I don't want to get ahead of it as well. But, I think if you're thinking about a terrorist attack in the United States by Iran, it would not be a surprise, given the fact that Iran is a known terrorist country that perpetrates terror attacks around the world. To have that happen in the United States is certainly a real possibility. That's why I'm in regular communication with Department of Homeland Security and local law enforcement to make sure we're monitoring situations to try to anticipate that kind of attack. But certainly it's a very real concern that I have. And in addition to terror attacks, the thing that I'm really concerned about is cyber attacks. We had an attack in Michigan yesterday, and a company that may indeed be linked to the Iranian government. They're very sophisticated when it comes to cyber attacks, and certainly I believe that that's something we're likely to see in the days ahead.
Senator, you just invoked the name of the most responsible agency in this space you just summarized, Department of Homeland Security. Everyone in my audience knows that many of those employees are still at work but are not getting paid because of this standoff over DHS funding. Many in my audience would say, reasonably, I think, can't Congress resolve that so we can take the cloud of uncertainty over those employees' heads?
Certainly, that's what we have to fund Homeland Security, and that's what we did today as Democrats. We put a number of bills to make sure that we're paying TSA and to make sure that they have the resources. Republicans, unfortunately, blocked that bill. We put a bill to make sure the Coast Guard is getting paid, has our resources. Republicans blocked that bill. We put together a bill to fund CISA, which is our #1 cybersecurity agency. Republicans blocked that bill. So we are trying. We all agree that those agencies need to have resources, but we don't control the Senate. We don't control the House. And if Republicans say no and won't even take the bill up, we are in a position where we should not be in.
Michigan Democratic Senator Gary Peters, thanks for your time, sir.
Thank you.
We turn now to our Matt Gutman, who joins us from Tel Aviv. Matt, tell us what you know.
Major, I think what we're seeing develop in the Middle East right now is Iran resilient, Iran able to start to take the offensive here. And that's what we're seeing in the Strait of Hormuz. They have attacked, I don't know, my count, 5-6 ships over the past 24 hours or so, essentially paralyzing the Strait of Hormuz. And they've done it at very low cost. They're using missiles that are not very expensive. They're fired from up to 100 miles inland, so you can't see them. They are not easy to detect. And that is proving to be the major part of the theater of this war. What we are seeing, analysts tell us, is Iran dictating the pace of the war, the theater and location of the war, and the war's duration at this point. And there is something that I just learned a few minutes before we came on air, and I want to share it with you. I've been asking maritime tracking companies all day about what ships are getting through, how much of them or what's in those ships. Well, we do know that there are 500 tankers waiting on either side of the Strait of Hormuz, that choke point that through which about 50% or 20%, of the world's oil flows. It's a channel, very, very narrow, 20 miles. There's a 2-mile lane in one way, a 2-mile lane in the other, a buffer in between. And Iran has bombed a ship right in the middle of that. But there are some ships getting through, and those ships are Iranian oil tankers. And we learned that just at least for the first 9 days of the month of March until March 9th, Iran has actually increased its exports of oil to about 1 million barrels a day through the straits, or an increase of about 30%. So they're actually able to sell more oil in the beginning of this war than they were in the month of February, a statistic that I found just astounding, Major.
And that is revenue, and revenue sustains a regime.
That's exactly right. And we talked about regime change for the past 2 weeks. It is something that President Trump has called on the Iranian people to do, to rise up against the regime. Just tonight, Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel talked about regime change. He has encouraged Iran to rise up. He's also threatened the new Ayatollah, saying, I would not take insurance policy on him. But increasingly, analysts and officials in this region are saying this regime is not going anywhere. They are entrenched. They are starting to recover, and they're starting to show the strategy that they have been working on for years. And it's not just about attacking the Gulf states. It's not just about paralyzing the Persian Gulf. And it's not just about using the Ring of Fire. It's proxies. It's all of that together to pressure the U.S. and Israel and any of its adversaries into submission. We don't know if the submission is going to happen, but certainly the squeeze is being put on the U.S. and Israel and the Gulf states in particular. Their oil depots, their fuel depots, their refineries are being hit, their ports are being targeted, their financial centers are being targeted. And honestly, the biggest question in this war is at what point do they put so much pressure on the U.S. administration, on the White House, that President Trump needs to find an off-ramp, because it's unclear how long the economies of this region can sustain this kind of total economic paralysis in the region. Most of the airports aren't working. Financial districts aren't working. And as we know, there is zero oil passing through the Strait of Hormuz, but also 30% of the world's fertilizer goes through there. A significant proportion of the liquefied natural gas. All of that is absolutely frozen at this point, Major.
Big spike in oil prices globally today for all the reasons that Matt Gutman just summarized. Always appreciate you, sir. Thank you very much. I want to let you know that we've just been advised that 8 first responders at the Temple Israel attack in West Bloomfield, Michigan, receiving medical care at 2 separate hospitals in that region. That's just the most recent thing we heard. Still to come on the Takeout, Massachusetts Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren. The bill that she is spearheading, dealing with housing, passed the Senate today. We're going to talk about its prospects. Also, Arkansas Republican Congressman and Chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Rick Crawford, on his assessment so far of the war with Iran. Also, today, South Carolina Democratic Congressman Jim Clyburn announced that he will seek an 18th term in Congress. Our political panel will talk about that and much else. Takeout comes back to you in 90 seconds. Welcome back to Takeout. The Senate did something today it rarely does. Pass a big, complicated bill on a bipartisan basis about an issue that millions of Americans care about, the issue housing costs. Earlier today, I spoke with Massachusetts Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren about that bill and a lot else. Federal housing legislation is pretty rare. The last big bill passed in 1990. Senator Warren, what does this have in it to address real-time problems Americans have either with their rent or with their housing affordability?
Well, look, the big problem is we just don't have enough housing in America, and we need more housing of every kind. Housing for first-time home buyers, housing for renters, housing for seniors, for people with disabilities, for people who have no housing, for people growing their families, rural, urban. And what this bill is about is more. Every provision in this bill, and there are more than 40 of them, push in exactly the same direction, and that is different ways to help bring down the cost of building more housing and to urge communities to get more housing done. So ultimately, with this bill, good first step, we're going to bring down the cost of housing by just having more of it.
It passed the Senate today 89-10. That means it's by definition bipartisan. I also know enough about legislation, Senator, to know that when it's bipartisan, there are things you love and there are things you had to swallow. What do you love and what did you have to swallow that you would have preferred not to?
You know, what I love about this bill is that it's very positive. It's got a lot of creative ideas. Lisa Blunt Rochester got a piece in here that said, how about if we have something available in the way of plan books so that cities can say in advance that if you'll follow the basic structural plans here, you don't have to spend any time waiting for your permits. Your permits will be automatic, and that helps bring down cost. It's got a provision in it that says we're going to cut the red tape around environmental approvals when you're doing infill housing. I mean, you know, housing between 2 other pieces of housing. And one of the parts that we've never seen before, we're saying in this bill, private equity, you got to stay out of the single-family housing market. Right now, we're watching people who try to buy their first home. They put everything together, and then in swoops an investor from Wall Street, makes an all-cash offer, and ends up buying the house. And what this bill says is we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to put some real curbs because we believe that housing should be for families, not for corporations. A lot to love here.
What is the White House disposition about this bill? I keep reading different things. The president likes that provision you just mentioned about private equity, but there's also reporting I've seen this week that the White House no longer considers it a priority.
Well, all I can say is we've worked very closely with the White House. They have signed off on the bill as written and put out a written statement of enthusiastic support for this bill. So this really is a case. Democrats are on it, Republicans are on it, and the White House is on it. We ought to get this bill done.
Let me ask you about the Iran war. What is your attitude about how it's going, and what are your near-term fears?
Well, my biggest fear here is that the administration still can't explain what we're doing over there, what our goals are, what constitutes success. All they seem to be able to manage to do is spend a lot of money. So in a world where we just read that 80 million families are struggling to pay for their health care in light of the cuts that the Trump administration has put in place, and Donald Trump and the Republicans say, hey, there's just no money to help them out. But they can spend $1 billion a day bombing Iran for no reason that they can explain. You know, look, Donald Trump ran for office saying he would lower costs on day one, sure hasn't done that. And he also said that he would be a president not to start wars, but to make peace, and that that's what constituted America first. Spending billions of dollars bombing Iran is not making us safer, and it means we're spending money over there we ought to be spending at home.
Let me paraphrase something that John Fetterman, Democrat from Pennsylvania, said on my program last night, which is, why can't Democrats celebrate the death of Ayatollah Khamenei and the regime in Iran that has got blood on its hands for 47 years of Americans?
I think we have. I mean, I didn't see anybody who was sympathetic about losing that man. And I think that the world is a better place without him. The question is what comes next and at what price? Because right now it appears that a hardliner has been replaced by the hardliner's son and is known to be even more hardline, only now he comes with the grudges of knowing that the United States of America killed his father and killed his wife. What are we trying to accomplish, and how are we going to do it? And all I gotta say is, you know, if they had one answer, two answers, okay, we could work with that. But the Trump administration gives a different answer every hour, and that means they have no answer at all.
Senator, let me ask you about something near and dear to your heart, Consumer Financial Protection Board. Yeah. There's going to be on our program later this week someone who's written for ProPublica about problems now because the Trump administration has dramatically reduced the people who work at the CFPB and its willingness to engage in direct consumer complaints about credit reports. Americans have errors on their credit reports. They're asking for the credit rating agencies to fix them. The CFPB used to be something they could turn to help them, and it appears that that's not happening anymore.
Yep. Understand this. The CFPB has been the cop on the beat. And they've been there if there's a mistake on your credit report and the credit agency won't fix it. They're there when you get cheated on your credit cards. They're there to make sure you don't get cheated on your mortgage. They're there when you have a problem. And what Donald Trump and Mr. Vogt have done is they've just sidelined the cop. And guess what happens when you sideline the cop? The bad guys start acting like bad guys again. And in this case, one of the whole reasons for having the CFPB move into this area was because the credit reporting agencies, even though the law requires them to correct errors, just basically were telling consumers, go jump in the lake. They just wouldn't make the corrections. So the CFPB, cop on the beat, showed some real muscle, and by golly, it helped a lot of people. And now, with that cop sidelined, it means those folks don't get help. And understand, like I said, it's happening in area after area after area. Understand, CFPB, before it got sidelined, was returning more than $1 billion a year to families who got cheated. And now, under the Trump administration, they're just not there to be in the fight. But the cheating still goes on, and families are the ones who lose.
Elizabeth Warren, Democratic Senator from Massachusetts. Appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Next here on The Takeout, former Israeli ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren, when we come back. Officials in Lebanon say more than 630 people have been killed during the war with Iran, including 91 children. Former Israeli ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren, joins me now. Michael, I know it's late there. Thank you for staying up to talk to us about this. For those in my audience who hear about Lebanon, they may or may not know, they understand the relationship with the war with Iran. Explain that.
Yeah. Good to be with you, Major, as always. Thank you. It's a direct connection. Lebanon is under the thumb of Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a terrorist organization. It's not just any terrorist organization. It's widely recognized as the most powerful non-governmental military organization, not just in the Middle East, but anywhere. And it is a direct branch of the Iranian leadership. And so there's been a war now, as you know, close to 2 weeks with the United States and Israel and Iran. Iran has given the go fire at Israel order to Hezbollah, and Hezbollah has immediately acquiesced in that and has opened fire with hundreds and hundreds of rockets fired at Israel. Just yesterday, last night, 250 rockets fired by Hezbollah at communities in northern Israel. And Israel, quite within its rights, is firing back.
Within that context, Michael, what is the coordination between Israel and the United States military in the theater known as Lebanon?
Well, I don't know if there's no coordination the way that we have it with Iran, where there's a clear division of labor, if you would, with the United States and Israeli air forces and other forces closely coordinating on every operation. What is happening in Lebanon is the United States has given Israel a green light to do what it needs to defend ourselves from the Hezbollah threat. And that has been for a while now, but I think now it's extremely important because I was up in the north yesterday, northern Galilee, and it's the entire communities have been rendered into ghost towns unless Hezbollah is convincingly defeated, is driven back from that northern border. Northern Israel will be rendered virtually inhabitable. So it's not just a military threat; it's a national threat of the first order.
And for the Israeli government, Michael, Lebanon, Hezbollah has been an ongoing issue. Is this the moment, in the way the Israeli government views it, to end that threat once and for all? And is that strategically, tactically possible?
Well, here's the big difference, Major, is that for the first time, the Lebanese government has come out and condemned Hezbollah. And there even talk about rifts within the Shiite community in Lebanon. No one wants to bring what's happened in so many places in the Middle East to Lebanon. And Lebanon, the people of Lebanon, vast majority of them, and the government of Lebanon wants peace with us. They've actually offered to have peace talks with us on the island of Cyprus, and will be doing it, I'm certain, if the Lebanese government can make good on its promises to try to disarm Hezbollah. That's been Lebanon's commitment to the United States. In any event, nothing is static, and the relationship, I think, can improve, but we cannot improve as long as Hezbollah retains its military edge, its tremendous power. We're talking about tens of thousands of rockets and tens of thousands of terrorists under arms, which threaten not just Israel. They threaten Lebanon. They threaten the entire region.
There are those in my audience, Michael, who might remember, wait a minute, I thought Israel conducted these series of operations clandestinely and otherwise to take out much, if not all, of the senior leadership of Hezbollah. Is that not true?
But it goes to show it's a very good, I think, a cautionary tale, because we're up against enemies, whether it be Hezbollah, Hamas, or Iran, for basically have the same definition of victory. And that victory is we don't lose. If we don't lose, we've won. And they don't really care how many leaders that are eliminated, how many ships are sunk, how many cities are destroyed or civilians killed. The important thing is at the end, they can come out and give the victory sign and say that they won, and they can begin to rebuild. And we saw how Iran rebuilt its missile capacity after last summer's 12-day war, and how Hezbollah, after being decisively defeated by Israel in the Gaza war, as it called, after October 2023, has also rebuilt much of its capacities. So there's a great cautionary tale here that in order to truly defend ourselves and defend the region from these terrorists, we've got to keep up the pressure. We can't let our guard down ever.
Michael Oren, it's always a pleasure. I appreciate the time, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Major.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said today the United States will escort ships through the Strait of Hormuz. Earlier, I spoke to Arkansas Republican Congressman and Chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Rick Crawford, about the war. Please take a listen. Today brought the first statement released by Iran's new supreme leader. You couldn't see him. All you heard was a voice, wasn't his. It was from what I think we would characterize as an Iranian regime presenter. How do you evaluate that, Congressman?
Well, I mean, it says a lot about whether or not he is really running the country or if a group of people are running the country. I would think if that were me, I would want the Iranian people to know that they do have a supreme leader and that he's present and he is in control. And I think what we've seen is fragmented leadership. We've seen that with sort of stray targeting of Gulf country neighbors. And I just think this is a real problem for the Iranian people. And the fact that they just aren't able to produce him publicly does raise a lot of questions.
There's reporting that the U.S. intelligence community has at least preliminarily concluded that it will be unlikely for this aerial assault to dislodge the Iranian regime as we have come to know it. Do you agree with that?
Well, I certainly wouldn't disagree with it, and I'm taking their word for it because they have the information at hand and I don't. I haven't been briefed on that, but I would say this. They've gone through a few layers of leadership, obviously, and so I think they are hunkered down and making sure that they don't make the same mistake again. They've made it 2 or 3 times now. And so I think it's in their interests. I think that there's some open source reporting indicating that they have sort of vacated their space and moving inland away from the targeted areas and are trying to secure that leadership regime. And I mean, that's probably a smart move on their part. They don't want to continue to be targeted. Doesn't necessarily mean that they can't be. It just means that they're very conscious of the fact that they are, in fact, targets.
You know as well as I do that President Trump is granted a lot of leeway rhetorically, but yesterday he said this event going on in Iran is a little excursion. He also said it's a war. To your mind, Congressman, can it possibly be both?
Well, I don't want to parse the president's words. He has his own way of expressing things. I think excursion is his characterization of this engagement as it applies to the length of time that he's committed to it. I think that he expects this to be done quickly and has demonstrated military prowess that we've probably never seen before. And so on that score, I'd say he's probably right. This could and should be over fairly quickly. But I do think, when you've got airplanes in the air and you're bombing these targets, and these are all legitimate targets and have been reviewed, then yeah, that's probably a war footing. And so I think he's trying to sort of thread that needle and uses his own way of expressing that. But that's how I would characterize it.
There was also reporting today in Axios that if the Iranians do succeed in harassing vessels and effectively closing down the Strait of Hormuz, that will make the president, in their words, more dug in. How do you evaluate the situation as we know it in the Strait of Hormuz and how critical that is to resolving this one way or the other?
Yeah, this isn't the first time that the Strait of Hormuz has been threatened kinetically, and they're striking these. The first one that they struck was actually an Iranian vessel that was under sanction. They were willing to sacrifice that vessel to make a statement. That statement was, look, what we can do if we can't strike militarily or mine the strait is to undermine the actuary's ability to write insurance on it. So basically, that corridor is closed off from an insurance perspective. Can we reopen it militarily? Yeah, I think we have the ability to do that. That's a decision that President Trump is going to make. It's in the rest of the world's interest to reopen that transit so that 20-some% of those products of the world's global supply moves through the Strait of Hormuz. And so I think it's important that the trade route be restored. It just remains to be seen how dug in the Iranians are, quite frankly. I mean, they're targeting indiscriminately, and they're trying to make backdoor deals with other countries to give them safe passage. I know that just according to some open source reporting that I've seen, Pakistan has sent a couple of vessels to help escort Pakistani flagged vessels because they receive nearly 90% of their energy comes through that strait as well. So it's obviously very important to the rest of the world.
On CNBC this morning, the Energy Secretary Chris Wright was asked how soon the U.S. Navy could escort vessels there in the Strait of Hormuz. He said not till the end of this month, and he wasn't even absolutely certain about that. Are you comfortable with that timeline?
I'm not going to characterize that statement at all because I haven't talked to the Department of War on that, what their assessment is of how quickly they can move on that. But I do know that it's a topic of conversation. It won't be the first time that we've escorted tankers. As I said, it started back in 1988 when the Samuel B. Roberts was struck after the mining that the Iranians did. So we have precedent and history of doing that. And so I suspect that's definitely going to be one course of action they'll pursue.
And what do you believe, Congressman, is the current status of Iran's nuclear facilities, meaning the infrastructure and the whereabouts of some 950 pounds or more of highly enriched uranium?
So I haven't gotten a report on how much fissile material still remains there, but obviously the idea is if they've still got fissile material and a will, they're going to try to develop nuclear weapons. That's just all there is to it. And so I think the president sees it the same way, which is why he took the action that he did, because they were so close to being able to deliver an actual nuclear weapon against the United States targets and our allies. And so that's why that he took the initiative. I can't speak to how much they've degraded their ability to enrich, but I would say significantly. Obviously, going back to last year when we did the strike in June, but even in this case, there's been some targeting that has significantly degraded their ability to launch and to produce ballistic missiles and to continue to enrich.
Congressman Rick Crawford, Republican, Arkansas, Chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Thanks so much for your time.
You bet. Thank you.
Political panel time. Former Democratic Congressman from South Carolina, Joe Cunningham, and Republican strategist Mark Bednar, who was the head of communications, former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, and they both have, show them up. Come on, guys, good.
All right.
Yeah, just lighten it up a little bit. Just lighten it up. Monogrammed cufflinks. Look at that. Very nice. Very sharp. They're sharp dressers. They bring the A game to the takeout. So, Joe, if I can call you that, let me start with you. Jim Clyburn. He put out a fundraising email earlier, a couple weeks ago, maybe longer, and confirmed today he's running for re-election. Does that surprise you at all?
Not particularly. I think he was gearing up, and I mean, he's dropped a couple of hints that.
There's this generational conversation going on.
Steny Hoyer and Nancy Pelosi both stepping aside. You figure, he might be on that list as well, but has decided to take another run at it.
And going to be reelected in all likelihood.
Yeah, in all likelihood. I don't see much of a primary challenge right now. But
how do you detect this war with Iran going over in South Carolina?
Well, we saw the comments from Senator Graham going back and telling South Carolinians to send their sons and daughters over to the Middle East. I don't see there's much of an appetite for it, and for a couple of reasons. Number one, I don't think there's been a clear definition of what success looks like or what the actual goals are. We've heard regime change. We've heard stopping Iran from developing nuclear weapons.
Ballistic missiles.
Yeah, but it's also coming on the heels of our generation of going through Iraq and Afghanistan and these endless wars. And I don't think America has the appetite for that. And look, if the Trump administration is able to accomplish whatever their goals are in a short period of time, then kudos to him. But if you start putting more and more boots on the ground and we start sending our men and women back in boxes to this country and we start adding billions, if not trillions, to the national debt, I think what little appetite America had for this conflict is going to wane pretty quickly.
Mark, your specialty is communications of a political nature. How's the White House doing on this?
Well, I think the fact that they...
Even Republicans tell me they're confused.
Well, let's take a step back. Initially, when the strikes first took place, the fact that they were that the White House engaged with the Gang of Eight prior to the strikes, directly after, and then with the House and Senate in that subsequent week, that's a really big deal. And that engagement, that communication needs to continue. But then the dual side track of that is also with the American public.
Right, because it's one thing, and you're right, to talk to all the senior people in intelligence and leadership, that's important, and have the briefings for all the rank and file members. But the American public are watching this minute by minute.
Right, so, and this is...
As I mentioned to Congressman Rick Crawford, when the president yesterday says little excursion and war almost in the same breath, it's hard to match those two.
Well,
wouldn't you agree?
The military, the overwhelming force that the U.S. military has been able to demonstrate is that's important to wrap that up as soon as possible, and also to have that overwhelming force to actually show the American public that we do have not only the effectiveness to get this done quickly, but also to actually just execute the mission wholeheartedly.
Right.
But more communication is always a good thing, especially in a 24/7 news environment where the American public, to your point, Major, they can see everything that's happening in real time. So they need the bedside manner from the administration throughout this whole process.
And Joe, when Axios reports that if the Iranians are successful for any duration of time, blocking the Strait of Hormuz and therefore destabilizing global oil markets and possibly the world economy, he will get dug in. That doesn't sound like wrap up as soon as possible.
No, I mean, we saw comments from President Trump I think he was in Kentucky yesterday, allude to the mission accomplished, right? We saw it was similar rhetoric. There's going to be a lot of effects from this, economic ones for sure. And again, I think America is going into this with already a high level of reluctance, and that's going to get even worse as the economic pressures increase, but also as American lives are lost and billions of dollars are continuing to be spent over there.
Mark, as you think about this from the vantage point of someone in House Republican leadership, how do you think they're trying to assess the next couple of weeks?
Well, we've seen reporting how Republicans are actually considering a go-it-alone reconciliation approach to potentially funding the munitions. I actually think that's a big mistake. Should they choose that route? On one hand, it's a better message for the entire country if there's a unified front, that you have Republicans and Democrats supporting this.
Not using a tool simply for the majority party's benefit, which is what reconciliation is.
Correct. But furthermore, on a political standpoint,
pressurize some Democrats to say yes or no.
Right. Democrats should have to show where their vote is here. If it's just a reconciliation track, then they have an easy out. They can say, Republicans, this is on you. So hopefully that both sides can come together here.
So
and
evaluate that.
I mean, you got to give them something, though. You got to give the American people something, and you got to give Democrats something as to what the end goal is, what the objectives are, where's this money going, and where does it stop?
Because it could be $50 billion, it could be $60 or $70 billion in terms of another request for funds.
Or if it's a 2-week thing, or if it's a 2-year thing. I mean, right now, sitting here, I don't know what the.
What do you think most Democrats would do with a request like that?
I think there's going to be a lot of hesitancy to do that. And look, Democrats, I mean, we're all Democrats, Republicans, we're all Americans.
You want the military to succeed. You don't want to pull money from the military. You want them to succeed,
but let's bifurcate that, protecting our troops and making sure they succeed, to determining what the clear objectives actually are.
Mark, 30 seconds.
That's very fair. Like the American public, I think, everyone is asking, how long is this going to go on? But, it behooves the Trump administration militarily, economically, diplomatically, and politically to actually find a win and declare a win as soon as possible here.
Gentlemen, I appreciate it. Folks in the audience, you're talking about this at home. Got some pros here who understand how politicians talk about this. You got an insight into what that sounds like. It's been a tough day. I'm going to skip the happy Thursday part. I'll just say it's Thursday. This is The Takeout. Relentlessly curious, reliably civil, occasionally clever. Daily Report coming your way next.